A little girl, not yet 4, sat on a kitchen floor playing with crayons, completely unaware that 2 lawyers were deciding her future in a courtroom across town. Her mother, Diane, had made a choice 3 years earlier. She looked at Marcus Holt, the man who loved her, and told him the baby belonged to someone else. That was a lie. The DNA confirmed it, 99.97%. Now Marcus is claiming that little girl as the sole heir to a $4.3 million estate. And Diane is absolutely terrified. Drop a comment of where are you watching from. Marcus Holt was not the kind of man who announced himself. Rooms didn't change when he walked into them. No applause, no performance, no ambient shift in energy that made people turn their heads. At 32, he ran a small but profitable logistics consulting firm and lived in a clean apartment with good lighting and very few decorations. A notepad by the phone, a folder on the desk, a single framed photograph of his mother on the bookshelf. That was Marcus. Diane Carver noticed him at a work mixer in October. Not immediately. He wasn't that kind of noticeable. 20 minutes in, when everyone else was performing and he simply wasn't, she found him, standing near the window with a glass of water, listening to someone talk, looking genuinely interested, not politely interested, actually interested. She introduced herself. Without being reminded, he remembered her name the next day. That was the first thing she noted. The way he paid attention, like it cost him something. Like your name, your story, your small Tuesday problems actually mattered. They dated for 2 years. Those 2 years had a texture to them. Unhurried, real, grounded in small, consistent things. Marcus cooked on Sundays. Not elaborate meals, just careful ones. 6 o'clock calls on weekdays, not to talk about anything important, just to hear how the day had landed. When Diane was anxious, which was often, though she rarely admitted it, he'd sit with her in the silence, without trying to fix anything. He understood that sometimes a person doesn't need solutions. Sometimes they just need someone who stays. Diane liked being with him. That part was true. Another part of her, restless, watching, always measuring, kept asking a question she never said out loud. Is this enough? Not because Marcus was lacking, he wasn't, but because she had grown up believing that love should feel like electricity, like urgency, like the breathless panic of almost losing something. Marcus felt like stillness. At 29, she wasn't sure stillness was what she wanted. Never once did she tell him this. She laughed at his jokes, leaned into his shoulder on Saturday mornings, told her friends he was wonderful. Because he was. She wasn't lying about that. Contentment was simply something she performed the way she performed most things. Just convincingly enough that no one questioned it. Including herself. For a while. David Marsh entered her professional world in February of their 2nd year. 37 years old, a regional sales director for a firm that worked alongside hers, loud in the way Diane secretly admired. Confident, quick, the kind of man who made things feel like they were moving even when they weren't. A smile that suggested he knew something you didn't. His attention landed on Diane differently than Marcus's did. Careful was Marcus's way. Intense was David's. Intensity to Diane felt closer to the electricity she'd been quietly craving. She told herself it was harmless. A work friendship. The easy rapport between 2 ambitious people sharing an orbit. 6 weeks she told herself this. By week 7 she wasn't telling herself anything. 2 dinners with David. Business, she said, to no one who asked. Around him, she laughed differently. Not the warm, unhurried laugh she had with Marcus. Faster, more performed. The difference was there. She chose not to name it. Marcus sensed something. Not the specifics. David wasn't in the picture yet, not visibly. Distance was what he felt. the way you register a drop in temperature before you see the clouds. Diane was present, but somewhere else, available but slightly out of reach. One Wednesday evening, when she'd come home distracted and left dinner half-finished, he asked quietly whether everything was okay. She said yes. Completely, he believed her. Because that's the thing about trusting someone. You don't audit them. You take their word the way you take air. You just assume it's clean. Back to the notepad by the phone he went. Back to the folder on the desk. The one with the Holt family name printed neatly on the tab, tucked behind a tax document, unremarkable and patient. He had mentioned it to Diane once, briefly. A family matter, an estate, something his uncle handled. She had nodded without retaining it. That folder never crossed her mind again. Their 2 years together produced small, specific evidence of permanence. A coffee mug she left at his apartment, a running joke about a restaurant they both hated. 300-and-something days of ordinary life that looked, from the outside, like a foundation. From the inside, for Diane, it was already shifting. Spring of their second year arrived, and still she had made no decisions. With Marcus at night, beside him on weekends, David's name in her phone under no pretense now, texted casually, frequently, with an ease that had stopped pretending to be professional. Marcus didn't know. Steady at 32, patient, completely certain about who he was going home to. The notepad, the folder, his mother's photograph. A man building something real with a woman he had chosen fully and without reservation. Then one evening in late April, Diane sat across from him at the kitchen table, folded her hands and told him she was pregnant. Everything in Marcus went still. Not with dread, with something that looked, from the outside, exactly like joy. Only certain men go still the way Marcus went still. Not frozen, not panicked, still in the way a person gets when something they've quietly hoped for suddenly becomes real, and they don't trust themselves to speak yet because the feeling is too large for casual words. Across the kitchen table he looked at Diane, watching him process it. The pregnancy, the news, the weight of what came next. She felt something unexpected. Guilt. Not the enormous crashing kind. Quieter. The kind that parks just below your sternum and doesn't announce itself. Just stays there, pressing gently, patient. Because Diane already knew something Marcus didn't. 8 weeks pregnant. She had confirmed it 4 days earlier. Alone in the bathroom of her office building. Door locked, hands not entirely steady. 8 weeks. And David Marsh, not officially labelled but present in her life, had been there for 6 of those 8 weeks. The math existed. 4 days she had sat with it before saying anything. Counting backward on a calendar, telling herself the timeline was ambiguous, that ambiguity left room for interpretation. David was 37, established, exciting in the way new things are. Marcus was steady and already looking at her like she'd handed him the world. That math was not actually ambiguous. Diane needed it to be, so she made it so in her mind, in the story she started building, in the version of events she rehearsed like lines before an audition. 8 weeks along, 6 weeks with David. The 2 weeks before David didn't disappear from the calendar. They were still there, still counted, still the most obvious answer. Deliberately, she ignored them. Marcus reached across the table and took both her hands. Her name, once, softly. Then a smile. The kind that doesn't perform anything, just arrives. Was she okay? Had she seen a doctor? What did she need right now? Fine, she said, nothing. Everything was good. That was the first clean lie, not the last. Over the following 2 weeks, the decision came in stages. Never all at once, because all at once would have required looking at it directly. Sideways instead. A longer conversation with David, a shorter one with Marcus. A growing certainty that the life David represented, faster, louder, more electric, was the one she'd actually been waiting for. 29 years old, she told herself she was finally being honest about what she wanted. Honesty and self-interest feel identical from the inside. By week 10 of the pregnancy, David knew. His response was measured, not cold but carefully assembled. Right words, right order. He called it a big deal and said he wasn't going anywhere. Across a restaurant table, he reached for her hand and held it for exactly long enough. Commitment was what Diane read into all of it. Across the city, Marcus had started researching family health histories, had texted his mother a photograph of the positive test, had moved the notepad from beside the phone to beside the bed. Names occurring to him at night now. Questions, small preparations. The Holt folder he'd thought about twice that week, briefly, the way you think about something that will matter later, even when it doesn't feel urgent now. Building towards something, he was. Diane was dismantling it, carefully, without him watching. Thursday evening in May, she ended things. Not the full truth, not yet. The relationship wasn't working. She needed space. She was sorry. The pregnancy stayed out of it entirely. She walked out carrying her coffee mug, and the running joke about the restaurant they both hated died quietly in the space she left behind. Alone in that apartment, Marcus sat for a long time. No calls, no texts, no request for a better explanation. He was the kind of man who believed that when someone showed you who they were, you were obligated to pay attention. She had shown him. He paid attention. Now, before we go any further into what happened next, if this story is already pulling at something in you, if you can feel where this is heading, and you want to make sure you don't miss the moment it all comes apart, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell. Because what Marcus does next, what he discovers, and what it costs Diane when the truth finally lands, that is not a story you want to walk into halfway. We'll be right here. 3 weeks after leaving Marcus, Diane told David she was pregnant with his child. Calm, certain. The quiet confidence of a woman who had already decided what the truth was. A beat too long, David looked at her. The way people do when they're calculating rather than feeling. Then nodded. Okay, he said. We'll figure it out. Those exact words he had said once before. Diane hadn't noticed the repetition. Somewhere across the city, in a quiet apartment with good lighting and very few decorations, a man who had just been told the relationship wasn't working sat beside a notepad full of names he had written for a child he didn't know yet was his. 6 weeks passed. Diane settled into her new life with the focused energy of someone who has made a decision and refuses to revisit it. She and David weren't officially living together yet, but present enough that the distinction barely mattered. His jacket on her chair, his coffee preference memorized, his name in her phone under no alias, no longer hidden, because nothing remained to hide. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. Conviction works that way. Even built on sand, it feels solid while you're standing on it. Across the city, Marcus had gone quiet. No calls, no texts, no appearance at mutual spaces they'd once shared. Cleanly, completely, without drama, he had withdrawn. The way certain people do when they've been hurt and have enough self-respect not to perform the injury publicly. His firm kept moving. His mornings kept starting. 7 names remained on the notepad beside his bed. Careful handwriting, boy names and girl names both. And the page stayed intact. Something had kept him from tearing it out. He would understand later. 4 months along now, Diane was visibly pregnant. Something Marcus didn't know because nobody had told him. moving through her days with David beside her, building the architecture of a life she had chosen fully. A doctor, a due date, a plan. What she didn't have was a conversation she kept postponing. Marcus needed to know. Not because she wanted to tell him, because her mother had sat across from her one Sunday afternoon and said, without drama, "Diane, that man deserves to know there's a child in the world, even if it isn't his." Her mother didn't have the full picture. Mothers rarely need it to see what's true. 11 more days she postponed it. Then she called Marcus on a Tuesday and asked if she could come over. Steady voice. Prepared. She had rehearsed this the way she rehearsed everything in the mirror, in the car, in the shower, until the words felt worn smooth and manageable. Marcus said yes. Before she arrived, he cleaned the apartment, not because he expected anything. No illusions remained about what they were to each other, but because that was Marcus. Clean and orderly and decent, even when the situation didn't require it, even when the person coming through the door had already decided who he was to her. 7 p.m, Diane arrived. On his couch she sat, the couch she had spent hundreds of hours on, hands folded in her lap, wearing the expression of a woman who has already completed this conversation in her head and is now simply executing it. "I'm pregnant," she said. Marcus didn't move. "The baby isn't yours." 4 words, clean, final. Without trembling, without tears, without the courtesy of hesitation. Nothing in the room changed. The lamp still threw the same light. The notepad sat beside the phone. He'd moved it back at some point, without thinking. On the desk, the Holt folder occupied its usual position. Unremarkable, patient, waiting for a moment that hadn't arrived yet. A long time Marcus looked at her. He believed her. That is the part that never leaves. Not the words, not the rune, not even those 7 names. The part that stays is that he believed her. Completely. Without demanding proof, without accusations, without making the moment about his own pain. 32 years old, he had loved this woman with his whole attention for 2 years, and when she told him the child wasn't his, he took her word for it. Trust works that way. It doesn't audit, it accepts. Watching him accept it, Diane felt something move through her that she would spend years trying to name. Not guilt exactly, something older than guilt, something that lives beneath the decisions we make and waits. She stood up to leave. Marcus stood too. Not to stop her, just because it was the right thing, the decent thing, the Marcus thing. Walking her to the door, he paused at the threshold before she stepped out and said 4 words. Quietly, without anger, without performance. "I hope you're happy." Not sarcastic, not weaponized, genuine, which made it infinitely worse. A cruel man says something cruel and you can dismiss it. A good man who genuinely hopes for your happiness after you've broken something irreplaceable that you carry. Down the hallway, Diane carried it. Into the elevator, through the lobby, out into the cool night air. Relief, she told herself, was what she felt. The door closed. Marcus stood in his apartment, clean, quiet, decent, unchanged, and looked at the room she had just left. The couch, the lamp, the notepad with 7 names. He picked it up. A long time he looked at the names. Then he set it down without tearing the page out. On his desk, the Holt folder sat exactly where it always had. Unremarkable, patient. A family name on the tab that meant nothing to Diane and everything to what came next. That night, Marcus didn't touch it. But he thought about it. Marcus did not fall apart. Among the few who knew enough to expect otherwise, that surprised people. Jerome, his closest friend, a man who had met Diane twice and formed an opinion both times, called 2 days after she left and asked how he was doing. "Fine," Marcus said. Jerome, who understood that "fine" from this particular man meant something private and not up for discussion, said okay and changed the subject. One conversation about Diane in 14 months, that was all. Work resumed the following Monday, not because the pain wasn't real. It sat in his chest the way a stone sits at the bottom of still water, heavy and unmoving and always there. But early in his life, Marcus had learned something most people discover much later, if at all. Grief and function are not opposites. You can carry something heavy and still move forward. The weight doesn't disqualify the walking. So he walked. Holt Logistics, a name that had always carried the quiet authority of the family behind it, had been generating roughly $400,000 in annual revenue when Diane left. Modest, stable, enough. Looking at those numbers the week after she walked out, Marcus made a decision that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with himself. He was going to build something. Wounded people perform recovery. They build to prove something, to become someone the person who left will regret leaving. Marcus was not performing anything. Building was what he understood. Work, unlike people, responded predictably to the effort you gave it. Certain comfort lives in problems that can actually be solved. 2 people hired in June, a third in August. February arrived. 11 months after Diane had sat on his couch and delivered 4 clean words. And Holt Logistics crossed $1.1 million in annual revenue. On a Tuesday afternoon, Marcus noted it, closed the spreadsheet, made himself a coffee. No celebration. Instead, he opened the Holt folder. More frequently lately, he had been opening it. Not obsessively, deliberately. Inside were the documents his Uncle Raymond had managed for years. Family estate records, property deeds, trust agreements, correspondence with the family's legal team. The outline of the estate Marcus had always known. The specifics he had never needed. He was beginning to think he should know the specifics. Raymond was 79 that year, sharp still but slower. Every few weeks a call came, not about the estate, just to talk. The way old men call the people they love when time starts feeling less abstract. Marcus always answered. Coffee by the window, listening to Raymond talk about weather and old friends and a city that kept changing around him. One evening in March, the estate came up. Casually, folded into the conversation like any other sentence. Marcus, you should come look at the documents properly sometime. There are conditions in there you need to understand. What kind of conditions? Marcus asked. A pause, not long, just enough. Bloodline conditions. The estate transfers to your direct heir, not to you as a holding, to your line. Your grandfather wrote it that way, and nobody changed it because nobody needed to. We assumed you'd have children by now. Quiet for a moment, Marcus sat with this. I don't have children, he said. Raymond said he knew, then give it some thought. Weather, after that. Marcus hung up and stayed by the window for a long time. Outside, the city moved in the way cities do after dark. Purposeful and indifferent, unbothered by what was happening in this particular room. He thought about the notepad, still on the bedside table. 7 names, slightly creased now, pencil starting to fade at the edges the way pencil does when it goes untouched. Still intact. When people asked about children, which they occasionally did, carefully, the way people ask careful questions of a 33-year-old man who lives alone, he told himself he simply hadn't met the right person yet, that it would happen. No hurry. Raymond's words sat differently than that comfortable story did. Bloodline conditions. His phone came off the table. Not to call Diane. 14 months of silence, and he was not about to break it now. Something quieter and more methodical moved through him. He thought about what he knew, what he had been told, what a woman had said to him on a Tuesday evening that he had chosen to believe without requiring proof. The timing. Anger wasn't part of this. Marcus was not an angry man. Precision was. And precision applied to the mathematics of what Diane had told him. 8 weeks pregnant when she ended things, 6 months before that still fully together, without question, produced a result that sat very still and very certain in the center of his mind. Claire's number he dialed next, not Raymond's estate lawyer. His own personal attorney, 3 years of business contracts between them, complete trust in both directions. A single question, he asked her. Quiet for a moment. Then, I'll need to look into a few things. Can I call you back tomorrow? Marcus said yes. Phone down. Halt folder open. For the first time in 14 months, Diane crossed his mind. Not with longing, not with bitterness, but with the focused clarity of a man who has just realized that a door he thought was closed might not be closed at all. Claire called back the next morning. Marcus listened. 2 questions asked. Thank you. Then the line ended. Whatever she had told him, he kept it close, tucked into the same internal space where he stored everything that mattered. Jerome didn't hear it. Raymond didn't either. Work opened on his laptop, and the information settled the way heavy things settle before you decide how to lift them. Across the city, Diane's life looked exactly like what she had wanted. 7 months now with David, living together in a newer apartment, louder in the way new things are loud, all open shelving and pendant lighting, and a kitchen island that photographed well. Diane had arranged it carefully, an eye for surfaces, for the angle from which things looked their best, and she had applied that eye generously to this new life. From the outside, it was everything. 4 months earlier, the baby had arrived. A girl born on a Wednesday morning in November, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the quiet alertness that makes nurses comment. Lily, Diane had named her, not after anyone specific. Soft, it suited her. It felt like a beginning. Lily was 4 months old now. Yellow curtains beside her crib. Diane had chosen yellow deliberately, because yellow meant warmth, and warmth was what she was building this whole life around. Mornings before David woke, nursing Lily in the early quiet. Just the 2 of them, yellow curtains catching the first light. Diane felt something uncomplicated and true. Her daughter she loved completely. That was never the question. Present in the way that looked like enough from a distance, David had been at the hospital for the birth. Arrived an hour in, explained he'd been stuck in traffic, held Lily for 4 minutes before his phone buzzed and he stepped into the hallway. Noted and moved past. New fathers were nervous. Adjustment took time. Generosity with interpretations felt, to Diane, like wisdom. 4 months old when Lily witnessed her first missed dinner. Nothing significant. No occasion. No guests. A Tuesday. David called at 6 p.m. to say the meeting was running long. Home by 8. He arrived at 10:17. Plate kept warm, placed on the table without comment, eaten without apology. Television. Bed. 1 Tuesday. Then another. A Thursday. A Saturday when he said he was meeting a colleague and returned smelling like a bar and the specific careful sobriety that only appears when someone has been drinking and waited long enough to seem fine. Each one she noted. Filed under adjustment period. Under the pressure of a new baby. Under Men take longer to settle into this, everyone says so. Diane kept a folder in her mind for things she wasn't ready to examine directly, and she was a very organized woman. That folder was getting full. 14 months old Lily. And David had by then missed 11 events he'd confirmed attending. Not enormous events. A pediatrician appointment, 2 dinners with Diane's mother, a Saturday morning planned deliberately for something ordinary together as a family. 11 different explanations. She had noted each one and commented on none, because commenting meant opening the folder. Unsteadily, determinedly, Lily was walking now. The particular focus of a small person who has decided that moving under her own power is non-negotiable. Kitchen cabinets hand over hand, then 3 or 4 steps into open space before sitting down hard, looking up to check if anyone was watching. Diane was always watching. Warm with Lily when he was present. Genuinely, not performatively. David would swing her up onto his shoulder, and she would shriek with delight and grab his collar. And watching this, Diane felt the folder in her mind was unnecessary. Problems she was inventing. Life was just textured and imperfect, and she had chosen correctly. Often she reminded herself of this. That's the thing about a conclusion you need to be true. You don't examine it, you repeat it, in different ways at different times until it stops sounding like a choice and starts sounding like a fact. Diane had been practicing this since before Lily was born, since before David, since the kitchen table conversation with Marcus she had filed under, necessary and done. Correct. She had chosen correctly. David's 3rd unexplained absence in 6 weeks fell on a Friday evening that would have been Marcus's and her 3rd anniversary. Though Diane didn't register the date consciously. Gone again. Lily asleep on the couch waiting for him. The apartment quiet in a way that had a different quality now than it used to. Not peaceful quiet. Waiting quiet. Carefully she lifted Lily from the couch so she wouldn't wake, and carried her to the crib with the yellow curtains. One small sound, then settling. Diane stood over the crib in the half-dark for a long moment. Across the city, a lawyer named Claire was preparing documents she had been asked to prepare. Diane didn't know that yet. Tucking the yellow curtain aside so the streetlight wouldn't fall on Lily's face, she went to make herself a cup of tea she didn't finish. Raymond Holt died on a Thursday morning in January. 81 years old. 8 months of slow decline. The kind that announces itself gently at first. A little more fatigue, a little less appetite, then accelerates in the final weeks with a directness that leaves families simultaneously prepared and completely blindsided. Every Sunday for those 8 months Marcus had visited. Coffee from the place Raymond liked. 2 sugars, no milk, paper cup, because Raymond said ceramic changed the taste. And they would sit together in the old man's living room and talk about nothing important until the important things said themselves. No children of his own Raymond had. Never married. Close once, he told Marcus, 1974, a woman named Helen who had chosen someone steadier. The specific laugh of a man who has made peace with a thing came when he said it, who can hold it up to the light without flinching. Into the Holt family estate he had poured his considerable energy instead, managing it with the precision and loyalty of someone who understood that legacy was its own kind of love. Marcus was the last Holt. Both parents gone within 18 months of each other. His father at 68, his mother at 65, when Marcus was 27. That grief had been enormous and private, and had shaped him in ways he was still discovering. Raymond had been the bridge between Marcus and the family that existed before him. The history, the property, the paperwork, the sense that a name carried weight beyond the person currently wearing it. Now Raymond was gone. 40 people at the funeral, maybe fewer, in a chapel that smelled like old wood and fresh flowers in unequal measure. Front row, Marcus sat, and didn't cry during the service. Once, briefly, alone in his car in the parking lot afterward. Then the engine started and he drove to his office because that was what he knew how to do. 3 days later, the estate lawyers, Castellan and Associates, established 1987. 4 attorneys, offices on the 14th floor of a building downtown, had managed the Holt estate for 22 years. Gerald Castellan, the senior partner, wore the same style of suit in slightly different colours every day and laid the documents across the conference table with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this many times and understood that precision was its own form of compassion. Marcus looked at the documents. Substantial, the Holt estate was, not ostentatious. Raymond had believed visible wealth was a form of vulnerability. 3 properties: the family house, a commercial building downtown generating reliable rental income, and a parcel of undeveloped land outside the city that had appreciated quietly for 30 years. Combined assessed value, $4.3 million. Gerald walked Marcus through each document. Then came the final page. The original trust agreement, drafted by Marcus's grandfather in 1971, amended once in 1989, untouched since. Gerald placed it on the table and folded his hands. "This is the condition you need to understand," he said. In outline, Marcus had known a condition existed. Raymond had mentioned it. Claire had referenced it in the phone call he had elaborated on to no one. Knowing something in outline and seeing it in formal legal language are different experiences. One is a shape in fog, the other is a wall. The condition was clear. Full transfer to Marcus as living heir. All 3 properties, all associated holdings, at the entire $4.3 million. But indefinite holding by Marcus alone was not permitted. Within 3 years of transfer, the estate must pass into a recognized legal structure, with a direct bloodline beneficiary named. A biological child legally established, named as heir within a specific window. Without that heir established within 3 years of Raymond's death, the full estate transferred to a charitable literacy foundation Raymond had supported for decades. Gerald Castellan delivered all of this calmly, because delivering difficult things calmly was his job. 3 years, a direct bloodline heir, legally established. On the conference table, the Holt folder lay open, his copy, patient and unremarkable for years, on his desk. Now surrounded by 2 lawyers and a reality he had been circling for 14 months without quite landing on. Claire's phone call came back to him. So did the mathematics. The quiet, irrefutable arithmetic of what Diane had told him on a Tuesday evening, and what he had chosen to believe without requiring proof. 8 weeks pregnant when she ended things. The months before that, still together, fully, without question. And a notepad with 7 names in careful handwriting that he had never torn out. Marcus looked at Gerald Castellan. "I may have a biological child," he said. "I was told otherwise. I have reason to believe the information I was given was incorrect." Gerald Castellan's expression didn't change, his pen uncapped. "Then we need to establish the facts," he said, "legally and formally. Do you know where the child is?" Marcus said yes. On his notepad. Not 7 names, just 1 question and 1 answer. Gerald wrote something, and the Holt folder sat open on the table between them, no longer patient, no longer waiting. Ready. 3 phone calls Gerald Castellan made that afternoon. Marcus didn't ask who he called. By then he understood that certain things moved better when you trusted the right people and stayed out of the way. His entire business had been built on that principle. Find the right people, give them the right information, let competence do what competence does. Same principle applied here in this 14th floor conference room with the Holt folder open on the table, with the same steadiness he applied to everything. 2 documents signed before he left. 90 minutes the drive back to his office took. 12 of them spent thinking, 7 in complete silence, and no music, no radio, just the city outside the windows. He parked, went upstairs, sat at his desk. His laptop opened to the Holt Logistics revenue dashboard. 40 seconds approximately, he looked at it. Then he closed it. Certain moments arrive in a person's life when everything they've built, the firm, the revenue, the careful daily architecture of a functioning adult, becomes temporarily beside the point. Not unimportant, just secondary. Marcus recognized this as one of those moments, and he did not resist the recognition. Door closed, office quiet, he sat at his desk and thought, with full attention, about a little girl he had never met. Her name he didn't know. Diane had not contacted him since the Tuesday evening she had sat on his couch and said 4 words. He had not contacted her. 14 months of clean, mutual silence had produced in Marcus a discipline that now served him in a way Diane had not anticipated when she chose it. No emotional debris to clear, no unfinished conversations pulling at him, no longing clouding his thinking, just clarity. Clarity said this: somewhere in this city lived a child who was 14 months old, described to him as someone else's. Her mother had done private mathematics and arrived at a conclusion that served her and presented it to him as fact. A child who, if Claire's research was correct and Marcus trusted Claire completely, shared his blood, his name, and his grandfather's legacy. A long time he thought about her. Then he stopped feeling. He started filing. That is the only way to describe what happened next. Not because Marcus had become cold, but because emotion applied to legal process produces mistakes. Marcus Holt did not make mistakes in areas that mattered. His father had taught him this. Raymond had reinforced it. 14 months of building something precise and profitable from nothing but focus had confirmed it. Claire's number he dialed. Expecting the call, she had been. 3 weeks spent building a documented picture of the timeline. The dates Marcus and Diane were together, the conception window, the birth date, the mathematics Diane had rearranged to suit herself. Claire presented it without drama, in the language of facts. Here is what the record shows. Here is what it implies. Here is what a court-ordered DNA test would confirm or deny. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Claire finished, he said, "File it." 2 words, quieter than 4. Formally titled in Re-Paternity Establishment, Holt versus Carver. The petition ran 11 pages long. Filed with the family court on Tuesday, March 4th at 9:47 in the morning by Claire's paralegal, Patricia, a thorough young woman who double-checked every page number and cross-reference before submission because Claire had trained her to treat every document as if someone's life depended on it. Someone's did. Precise the petition was: Marcus Holt, age 33, petitioner; Diane Carver, age 30, respondent. The minor child, referred to throughout as the minor child born November 12th, because the child's full name would be established through the proceedings. As the subject of the paternity claim, the conception timeline, a court-ordered DNA test requested, 1 carefully worded paragraph referencing the Holt estate and the bloodline condition that gave the claim its legal urgency. 11 pages, filed on a Tuesday. Diane was not notified in advance. No legal requirement existed for advance notification, and Claire, thorough in the way that protects her clients completely, had recommended against any prior contact, not out of cruelty, out of precision. Advance notice created the possibility of complication, rushed legal maneuvering, conversations that muddied the documented record. The filing would reach Diane through proper channels, in proper time, with proper legal weight behind it. That was the correct way. Drama was not what Marcus had asked for. His daughter was. Roy. A compact, efficient process server with 11 years of this particular work behind him, who had learned to move quickly and quietly through lobbies and hallways, received the documents from Patricia on Thursday afternoon, March 6th. He reviewed the address. This building he had been to before. Residential complex, north side of the city, 12 floors, a lobby with a doorman bypass during the morning shift change, if you timed it correctly. Roy noted the timing. The floor. The name on the documents. Diane Carver, Unit 7F. Into his bag went the envelope. Friday morning, 8:23. Roy parked outside Diane's building. One final check. Name, address, court stamp, all present. And he walked towards the entrance with the unhurried certainty of a man who knows exactly what he is delivering and exactly what it will mean when it arrives. Inside, Diane was making coffee, completely unaware. Lily was on the kitchen floor, playing with crayons. Roy pressed the buzzer for Unit 7F at 8:31 in the morning. Without checking the intercom, Diane answered a habit, the automatic trust of someone who had never had reason to be careful about who came to her door. She buzzed him up, assumed it was a delivery, and went back to the coffee she was making. The machine was still running. From the kitchen floor to the living room, Lily had migrated, trailing a red crayon, leaving a faint line along the baseboard that Diane would notice later and not have the energy to address. A knock came. Coffee mug in one hand, she opened the door with the other. Roy held out the envelope with the practiced efficiency of a man who has learned not to make eye contact for too long. "Diane Carver?" he said. She said yes. Into her free hand he placed the envelope, said "You've been served," and was back in the elevator before she had fully processed what had just happened. That was Roy's skill. Not speed exactly, but a clean disappearance, the kind that leaves no space for argument or the human instinct to hand something back. In her open doorway, Diane stood. Standard legal size, the envelope was white, heavier than it looked, with the Castellan and Associates letterhead printed in the upper left corner and a court stamp across the seal. She looked at it the way you look at something your body has already understood before your mind catches up. Her coffee cooled in the mug she was still holding. She closed the door. On the rug in the living room, Lily sat pressing the red crayon against a piece of paper with the focused intensity of a 14-month-old who has recently discovered that marks can be made and that making them is deeply satisfying. Briefly she looked up when Diane walked past, checking that her mother was still there, then went back to the paper. Diane sat on the couch. Without a coaster, she set the mug on the coffee table, which she never did, and turned the envelope over once. Then again. The court stamp was real. The letterhead was real. Its weight was real in a way that cheap things are not. She opened it. Castellan and Associates. In clean, authoritative font at the top of the first page. The name she didn't recognize immediately. Then the second line. In re. Paternity Establishment. Holt versus Carver. Completely, that name stopped her. Holt. Again she read it. Not because she had misread it, because reading it twice was the only response available to her in that moment. The only way her mind knew how to push back against something it was not prepared to receive. Marcus Holt. Page 2. formal, precise language. The kind specifically designed to remove all ambiguity from situations and leave only facts standing. Slowly she read it, not by choice but because her eyes kept snagging on specific words and refusing to move past them. The petitioner, the respondent, the minor child born November 12th. Paternity establishment, court-ordered DNA testing. Page 4 held a single paragraph referencing the Holt family estate. She read the figure, $4.3 million. And the phrase direct bloodline beneficiary and the 3-year legal window. Twice she read it, the way she had read Marcus's name, not because she misunderstood, because understanding required something she wasn't ready to give. Page 11. The final page. Court date. April 9th, 43 days away. Response required within 72 hours through legal counsel. The signature of Claire Ambrose, attorney at law, dated Tuesday, March 4th. 11 pages. On her lap, all 11 of them sat, coffee going cold on the table, Lily making small sounds of concentration in the next room. David was who she called. Not her mother, not a lawyer. David. The person she had built this life around, the one whose steadiness she had chosen over Marcus's stillness, the one who had said, "We'll figure it out," twice now, and whom she had believed both times. "Third ring," he answered. Quickly she told him, the words coming out in the wrong order. Marcus, a paternity claim, the estate, $4.3 million, a DNA test, 43 days. A moment of quiet from David. "Okay," he said, "don't panic. This is probably just... He probably doesn't have a real case. You told him Lily wasn't his. That should be enough." Diane said the court didn't seem to think so. "Slowly these things moved," David said. "Legal systems weren't fast. Get a lawyer, but don't worry too much yet because worry wouldn't help anything." All the right words in the right order, his voice steady and measured, and Diane, who needed steadiness more than accuracy in that moment, felt herself begin to breathe again. "We'll figure it out," he said. Third time. She believed him the third time, too. 20 minutes on her phone, searching. The lawyer with the most reviews and fastest response time. A $3,500 retainer signed by end of day. She did not read the retainer carefully. Still thinking about page 4, about $4.3 million, about the phrase direct bloodline beneficiary, and what it meant for a little girl currently pressing a red crayon against paper in the next room. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, sitting there on that couch with 11 pages on her lap, was what her own daughter's birth certificate said. Specifically, what it didn't say. Court-ordered DNA testing was issued on April 9th. Diane's lawyer, a competent but overextended man named Stephen Briggs, who had taken her retainer and her case with equal efficiency and equal haste, had filed a response to the petition on time, within the 72-hour window, contesting the claim on the grounds that Diane had already verbally established paternity with another party. 12 minutes on the phone, he explained this to Diane in language that made it sound more solid than it was. Solid it was not. Judge Patricia Owens, 54 years old, 21 years on the family court bench, a woman who had seen every variation of this particular human situation and developed a patience for cases where adults confused their preferences with facts, reviewed both filings on a Wednesday morning and ordered the DNA test without deliberation. Her written note on the order was 4 words. The child deserves clarity. Through Claire, Marcus received the order. He read it, set it down, went back to work. Expected all of it. His entire approach had been built around the assumption that the court would order the test, that the test would confirm what the mathematics had already told him, and that everything after confirmation was simply process. Certain he was, not nervous. Through Stephen Briggs, Diane received her copy, a Thursday afternoon phone call explaining what it meant. A court-appointed facility, a cheek swab, 14 days for results, mandatory compliance. Non-compliance noted in the record and interpreted unfavorably. No choice existed. Tuesday morning, the testing facility, a clean, quiet medical office on the 4th floor of a building specializing in family court referrals. Chairs the color of warm sand in the waiting room. A small basket of toys in the corner that Lily made immediately for, pulling out a soft yellow block and examining it with the seriousness of a person conducting important research. Watching her daughter play, Diane felt something she couldn't organize into words. 40 seconds the swab took. Sandra, the calm technician with the particular gentleness of someone who understands that the people in her chair are never having a good day, explained each step before doing it and told Lily she was very brave. Lily looked unbothered. The yellow block was more interesting. 40 seconds. A cotton swab held, for 40 seconds, the answer to a question that had been sitting unasked and unanswered for nearly 2 years. Separately, at a different facility, Marcus submitted his sample on the same Tuesday. Claire had arranged it that way. Parallel submissions, same lab, same timeline, nothing that could be questioned or contested on procedural grounds. His swab also took 40 seconds. Directly back to work afterward, conference call at noon. 14 days passed. Sit with this next part. I want you to really sit with it. Not because it is complicated, because it isn't, because it is the simplest, flattest, most irrefutable kind of truth. The kind that doesn't argue or leave room for interpretation or allow you to rearrange the numbers until they say something more convenient. This is where the story changes. Not just for them, for her. 14 days after the swabs were taken, results arrived at Claire's office on a Wednesday morning. Claire received them, reviewed them, called Marcus at 9:14 a.m. She read him the relevant section without preamble because Marcus was not a man who needed softening. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Marcus Holt was the biological father of the minor child born November 12th. Nothing he said for a moment, not because he was surprised, not precisely, but a difference exists between knowing something and having it confirmed, between carrying private certainty and holding a documented fact. 14 months that certainty had lived in his chest, quiet and patient and heavy. The fact arrived differently, like a door opening. Claire thanked, line ended. At his desk he sat. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Wednesday rhythm. Purposeful, unhurried, indifferent to what was happening in this particular building. The Holt Logistics dashboard open on his laptop. The Holt folder on the corner of his desk. The notepad. Same one. Page with 7 names, still intact. Beside his keyboard where he'd moved it 3 months ago, when he stopped pretending he might tear it out. At the names he looked. A pen he picked up. He circled one. 33 minutes after Claire had called Marcus. Stephen Briggs called Diane at 9:47 a.m. Less out of respect for her directness, and more because he hadn't decided how to soften it, he defaulted to reading the number plainly. 99.97%. Diane was in her kitchen. Lily was in the next room. Small sounds of a child moving through a space that belonged to her. Pulling toys from a basket, setting them down, picking up others. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Wednesday morning. Down onto the kitchen floor Diane sat. Not dramatically, not in collapse. The energy required to keep standing simply ran out, and the floor was there, and she sat on it, phone in her hand, the number still in her ear. 99.97%. She had been so sure. That is the thing about certainty. It doesn't warn you when it's wrong. Built on truth or built on the story you needed to believe, it feels identical either way. Nearly 2 years of certainty Diane had carried, her entire life organized around it. Across a kitchen table she had looked at a good man and delivered a verdict she believed completely. The lab did not agree. Now the law knew what the truth had always been. David Marsh did not leave all at once. Easier that would have been. Cleaner, more honest, the kind of exit that at least has the decency to announce itself. Instead, he left the way certain men leave. In stages, each one deniable, each one explainable with just enough plausibility that the woman watching it happen could choose, if she needed to, not to see it. Diane needed to. So she didn't. 4 days after Stephen Briggs delivered the DNA results, the first stage began. That evening, David came home quieter than usual. Not cold, just compressed, the way a person gets when they're thinking hard about something and haven't decided what to do with the thinking. Dinner made, eaten. He asked how Lily was. Diane said fine. Television, bed. He didn't ask about the case. Noted, filed, nothing said. Stage 2 arrived the following week. A business trip, his 4th in 6 weeks, to a city 3 hours away that his work genuinely required occasionally. But not, Diane had quietly calculated. This, frequently. 4 days gone. Texts each evening. A question about Lily, a comment about the hotel, a single emoji substituting for the conversation they weren't having. Thursday he came back, kissed her on the cheek. Bedroom door half closed while he unpacked. Diane made tea she didn't drink. By stage 3, we had quietly disappeared from David's vocabulary. Not dramatically. He hadn't replaced it with I in any obvious way. Subtler. The apartment became the apartment. Logistics became what makes sense. The legal situation, when he addressed it at all, which was less and less, became your case and your lawyer, and what you need to do. Your, not ours. Every syllable of it she heard. But hearing something and naming it are different acts, and naming it would have made it real, and making it real would have required opening the folder in her mind that was no longer just full. It was straining against its seams, impossible to keep closed much longer. 1 more week she kept it closed. Stage 4 happened on a Tuesday. David's preferred day, apparently, for the moments that mattered. Across from her at the kitchen table he sat, in the same chair Marcus had sat in when she had delivered 4 words that changed everything, and he said he thought they needed space. Not a breakup, space. Carefully rehearsed vocabulary, assembled in the car on the way home. The situation had become complicated. He cared about her and about Lily. Lily's name said specifically, deliberately, as evidence of his good intentions. Time to think about what he wanted, and what made sense going forward. Diane listened to all of it. Somewhere beneath the numbness, she recognized she had heard versions of this before. Not from David, but from herself. The careful language, the reasonable framing, the way you arrange words to make a decision sound like a pause. She didn't say that. She said okay. Saturday he moved out. Not all at once, because his lease on the apartment he had technically kept throughout their relationship had been quietly maintained, which she had not known, or had known and not examined, or had examined once and filed away under. It doesn't mean anything. His clothes, his coffee machine, 2 boxes of things that had always been his and never quite become theirs. His jacket stayed on the chair. accident or the unconscious instinct of a man who wanted to believe he was leaving a door open. Diane never determined which. 3 days she looked at it before putting it in a bag by the front door. 4th day she carried it to the trash. 6 weeks after the DNA results. 7 weeks after Roy had pressed the buzzer for Unit 7F on a Friday morning, with an envelope that changed the architecture of everything. David Marsh was gone. Family came first, he had always said it at dinner with Diane's mother, who had smiled and noted it, said it in the early months when Lily was newborn and the nights were long, and he had shown up with coffee and a willingness to sit in the difficulty. Probably he meant it, each time he said it. Most people mean the things they say at the time they say them. Meaning something and doing something are different commitments entirely. 30 years old, Diane sat in an apartment she could afford alone, but had not planned to afford alone. With a daughter 15 months old and growing faster than the situation around her, a legal case that had not paused for any of this, a lawyer she had chosen in 20 minutes, and trusted more than she should have. Alone. Not performing alone. Not the temporary alone of someone whose partner travels. Actually structurally, specifically alone in the way that lands differently at 11 p.m. when the apartment is quiet and the child is asleep, and there is no one to say the small things to, the nothing things, the Tuesday things that don't matter individually but collectively are the entire architecture of not being alone. Down the hall, Lily slept. Yellow curtains catching the streetlight the way they always did. Warm and still, indifferent to everything that had happened in the rooms beyond them. Across the city, Marcus Holt looked at a name he had circled on a notepad and began quietly to plan. Claire filed the amended petition on a Monday. 3 weeks had passed since the DNA results confirmed what Marcus had known, what the mathematics had told him, what 14 months of silence had not changed, what a cotton swab had simply made official. One full paragraph added to the original 11 pages. A formal request for joint legal custody, in addition to the existing paternity establishment and heir designation claims. One paragraph, significant as a verdict. Over coffee in his 14th floor conference room, Gerald Castellan had advised the addition carefully, with the measured deliberation of a man who understood that every word filed with a family court judge carries weight, that casual language does not. Joint legal custody, he explained, was not aggression. It was establishment. Marcus saying formally and permanently that he intended to be present, not as a name on a document, but as a father in the actual, daily, consequential sense of the word. Without hesitation, Marcus agreed. Tuesday morning, Stephen Briggs received the amended petition and called Diane within the hour. A quality had entered his voice that wasn't there before. Careful, measured, the tone of a lawyer who has reviewed opposing counsel's filing and found it more substantial than he had initially represented to his client. He did not say this directly. Significant was the word he used for the amendment. The DNA results had complicated the landscape. Marcus's legal team was thorough, a word he used twice, which Diane noted, because in her experience people repeated words when managing their way towards something they didn't want to say plainly. She asked him plainly, did she have a strong case? 4 seconds of silence. She counted. Then, you have a case. We need to build it carefully. That was the moment Diane understood that $3,500 had bought her competence, but not confidence. Different things, those are. A competent lawyer tells you the truth about your position. A confident one makes you feel better about it. Stephen Briggs was competent. More than competent, she needed. Renata Osei, 44 years old, 17 years in family law. A reputation in the courthouse for being methodical, unflappable, and effective in precisely these kinds of cases involving paternity disputes and estate claims. $450 an hour. The first invoice, $6,200 for the initial review and consultation. Diane paid without flinching, because flinching would have meant acknowledging what this cost, and she wasn't ready for that accounting yet. Week 3 of the proceedings, combined legal fees at $18,000. Everything Renata reviewed. The original petition, the DNA results, the amended filing, Diane's retainer agreement with Stephen, the birth certificate, the hospital records, 2 years of financial documents. Across from Diane in a spare, organized office, she asked questions with the directness of a woman who had learned that softening questions produced incomplete answers. About Marcus, she asked. Not about the legal situation. About Marcus, who he was, what he was like, whether he had ever been present during the pregnancy, whether Diane had told him directly that he was not the father, whether there were witnesses to that conversation. Diane answered everything. Without expression, Renata listened, wrote notes in a hand so small Diane couldn't read it from across the desk, and when Diane finished, sat quietly for a moment. He's going to be a credible petitioner, Renata said. The court will see a financially stable, professionally established man with documented biological paternity and a legitimate estate interest. Centering our argument on Lily's established routine and your role as primary caregiver. That's our ground. A pause. Arguing against his paternity is not an option. We're arguing for continuity in Lily's life. That's all we have. Diane nodded. Thinner ground than 2 months ago. She knew it. Renata knew it. The awareness of how much ground she had lost, and when, and why, sat in the room between them without needing to be named. April 9th, the first hearing. May 14th, the second. June 3rd, scheduled as the substantive hearing. Both legal teams presenting full arguments. Judge Patricia Owens beginning to form the opinion that would become, in time, a ruling. Renata prepared with a thoroughness her reputation promised. Marcus's team prepared with the thoroughness of people who had been building their case for 14 months without Diane knowing it. Claire had documents Diane didn't know existed. A timeline constructed from records and receipts, and the irrefutable arithmetic of dates, establishing with quiet precision exactly when Marcus and Diane had been together, exactly when the conception window fell, and exactly how the story Diane had told him compared to what the records showed. Among the documents Claire had filed was a single page. A handwritten note dated from the 2nd year of Marcus and Diane's relationship. A note Marcus had written to Diane. Kept by her, tucked into a book she hadn't opened in 2 years, referencing a conversation between them, about the future, about children, about what they both wanted. Not a love letter. Specific, dated, and relevant. Diane's own handwriting occupied the margin. 3 words, added at some point she couldn't now precisely remember in the ink she always used, in the hand that was unmistakably hers. I want this. Lily was in daycare that morning. A Tuesday, which had become, in this story, the day when things arrived that changed the shape of everything. 26 months old, a new word recently learned, deployed with particular enthusiasm and frequency. The word was mine. 4 hours and 12 minutes the June 3rd hearing lasted. Judge Patricia Owens listened to both legal teams with the attention of someone who has heard every version of every argument and is no longer interested in performance, only in substance. 6 questions she asked during the proceedings. 4 directed at Renata, 2 at Claire. Neither lawyer was asked anything Judge Owens didn't already know the answer to. That was how she worked. Methodical precision characterized Renata's presentation of Diane's case. Lily's established routine, her daycare, her pediatrician, The 26 months of primary caregiving Diane had provided without financial support from Marcus, without his presence, without any documented involvement from him in the child's daily life. A solid argument, built carefully. On the thinnest ground available, Renata had constructed something that held its shape. Marcus's team presented facts, not arguments. Facts. The timeline Claire had built over 14 months, document by document, receipt by receipt, the conception window, the DNA result, the Holt estate condition, the amended petition requesting joint legal custody and formal heir designation. One thing after another, in the same unhurried sequential way Claire did everything. Building a structure so clean and so documented that arguing against any single piece meant arguing against all of them. 3 pages of notes Judge Owens took, having asked her 6 questions. No ruling that day. Recessed until June 24th, with preliminary findings promised by then. Without drama, she gathered her papers and left the courtroom with the efficiency of a woman who had 17 other cases waiting, and understood that her time, correctly applied, was the most valuable thing in the room. Diane sat beside Renata as the courtroom emptied. How had it gone, she asked. We presented well. Their documentation is strong. Judge Owens is fair. That's the best thing I can tell you right now, Renata said. Fair, not favorable. Diane heard the difference. 11 days before the June 24th recess date, a settlement offer arrived from Marcus's legal team. Thursday, into Renata's office, a 4-page document, precise and clean, outlining terms under which Marcus would agree to a structured arrangement. Joint legal custody, formal heir designation for Lily, specified visitation. 1 weekend per month initially, building to alternate weekends by the end of the first year, and a commitment to contribute to Lily's educational expenses as the Holt estate was formally transferred. By any objective reading, it was a reasonable offer. That afternoon, Renata called Diane and read her the terms. Each one explained carefully, in the measured language of a lawyer who knows her client and knows the case. This is worth serious consideration. Their documentation is strong, and Judge Owens has shown no indication of favoring either position emotionally. A negotiated agreement gives you more control over the terms than a ruling will. Diane listened to all of it. Then she made her assessment, through the lens of a woman who had decided what the truth was and arranged the available evidence to support it. That was how she had been seeing things for 2 years. Marcus was offering a settlement. Settlements came from weakness, from uncertainty, from a legal team that had looked at the June 3rd hearing and concluded they were not as solid as they had appeared. Confidence where there was strategy, she read. Renata, she told, she wanted to counter. A moment of quiet from Renata. The specific quiet of a lawyer choosing between candor and client management. Then, what terms are you thinking? Since the call began, Diane had been thinking. Primary physical custody formalized. Not just assumed, but documented. Visitation limited to 1 weekend per month with no escalation clause. Marcus's access to Lily's educational decisions limited to consultation only, not joint decision-making. The heir designation structured so that Lily's inheritance required Diane's written consent at each significant transfer point. Renata wrote it down. What she was thinking, she did not say. What she was thinking was that 3 of Diane's 4 proposed terms were defensible, and 1, the consent requirement on the heir designation transfers, was the kind of counter that looked, from the outside, like negotiating leverage, but was in fact the kind of clause that an opposing legal team with 17 months of preparation and $4.3 million in the background would find very useful indeed. She wrote it down anyway, because Diane was her client, And her client had decided. Filed on a Friday, 48 hours after Renata received the original settlement. Itself, 11 days before Judge Owens's June 24th recess date. Thursday evening at Renata's office, Diane signed the counter-offer after a 30-minute review covering 3 of the 4 proposed terms in detail. The 4th term, the consent clause on the heir designation, reviewed in 4 minutes. Diane signed it, steady hand. The hand of a woman who believed she was negotiating from strength, who believed the settlement offer had come from uncertainty, who believed the counter she had constructed, carefully, logically, on her own terms, was the move of someone who understood the board. Thursday, she signed it. By end of day, Renata sent it to Claire's office. Claire received it at 4:47 p.m., read through all 4 terms and stopped at the 4th. Read it twice. Then she picked up the phone. Marcus answered on the first ring. She read him the 4th term. 3 seconds of silence. Then, she signed it. Claire said yes. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Outside his window, the city moved the way cities move at the end of a Thursday, emptying, deliberate, headed somewhere. On his desk, the Holt folder sat open to the page it had been open to for weeks. On his notepad, one name circled in pen, deliberate and permanent. "Don't counter," he said. "Accept it." June 24th arrived the way consequential days always do. Without announcement, without ceremony. The sun came up the same way it always had. The city moved through its Tuesday morning rhythms without pausing. And somewhere across town, a woman dressed carefully in front of a mirror and told herself she was ready for whatever happened next. Somewhere across the same town, a man made his coffee, checked his phone, and drove to the courthouse in the deliberate silence he brought to everything that mattered. Together, they did not arrive. 2 years and more they had not spoken directly, not since the Tuesday evening, when Diane had sat on Marcus's couch and delivered 4 words that she had believed completely and that a laboratory had since measured at 99.97% incorrect. 2 years of legal documents and lawyer phone calls and a child growing from 14 months to 28 months. Learning words and colours and the geography of the apartment she had always known as home. At 9 a.m. precisely, Judge Patricia Owens took the bench. 17 cases on her docket that month. This one. Holt versus Carver, case number 2024-FC-0847, had received more of her attention than most. Not because it was the most emotionally complex case she had seen, but because the documentation on both sides was unusually thorough, and the child at the centre of it was real, and small and deserving of a decision made with care. With care she had made it. 9 pages her preliminary findings ran, drafted over 4 evenings at her kitchen table after her own children were in bed, in the quiet that serious work sometimes requires. Into the record she read them without rushing, in the measured cadence of a woman who understood that the words she spoke in this room today would determine the shape of a child's life for years beyond this morning. Renata sat beside Diane and took notes. Claire sat beside Marcus and took none. The documentation read so thoroughly, built so carefully over so many months, that nothing in that courtroom needed writing down. She simply listened, hands folded on the table. Marcus's hands folded beside hers, same position, same stillness. Judge Owens ruled. Formally recognized as the biological father of the minor child born November 12th. Hereafter identified in all legal proceedings as Lily Ann Carver Holt. The hyphen was the judge's decision, not either party's request. A small thing, not a small thing. Joint legal custody was granted. Primary physical custody Diane retained. Lily would continue living in the apartment she had always known, attending the daycare she had always attended, sleeping under the yellow curtains she had slept under since she was 4 months old. That continuity, Judge Owens noted in her findings, was in Lily's best interest and would be preserved. Visitation granted to Marcus, 1 weekend per month, building to alternate weekends by month 12, with the escalation clause Diane's counter-offer had attempted to remove, and which the court had reinstated as a standard provision protecting the child's right to a relationship with both parents. The consent clause. The 4th term Diane had signed on a Thursday evening in 4 minutes was addressed in paragraph 7 of the findings. Without inflection, Judge Owens read it. As written and signed by the respondent, the clause established a consent mechanism for Lily's heir designation transfers, requiring the respondent's written approval at each significant point. What the respondent had not recognized, what 4 minutes of review had not surfaced, and what Renata had written down without saying aloud, was that the clause, in conceding the heir designation framework itself, had formally acknowledged Marcus's right to name Lily as the Holt estate beneficiary. By signing the consent requirement, Diane had signed the designation. The mechanism she had inserted as a control became the instrument of the very thing she had been trying to prevent. Countering a settlement to protect her position, she had handed Marcus the legal acknowledgement he needed most. Judge Owens moved to the next paragraph. Diane sat very still. No sound. No turn toward Renata. No glance at Marcus across the courtroom. Paragraph 7 settled over her the irreversible understanding of what she had signed on a Thursday evening, when she had believed she was winning. She had been so sure. Briefly, professionally, Renata placed a hand on Diane's arm. The kind of gesture that says, "I know, and there is nothing to do now but listen." Diane listened. At 10:14 a.m., Judge Owens finished. 9 pages gathered. Both legal teams regarded with the expression of a woman who has done her job carefully and has nothing to apologize for and nothing to celebrate. Just a ruling made with care for a child who deserved one. She left the courtroom. No eruption. Nobody moved dramatically. Claire closed her folder. Marcus unclenched his hands. The only visible sign across the entire morning that anything beneath his surface had been anything other than still, and looked at the middle distance for a moment. Outside, Lily was at daycare. 28 months old on a Tuesday. 3 new words learned that week, particularly attached to a stuffed rabbit named, with the creative confidence of a 2-year-old, Rabbit. Currently, in all probability, eating a snack and ignoring the children beside her, in favor of examining whatever was in her hand. No idea that her name had just changed. That it now carried a hyphen and a history and $4.3 million worth of legacy she would spend years learning to understand. Out of the courthouse, Marcus walked into the June morning. No celebration, no call to Jerome, no look back through the glass doors at whatever was happening behind him. Courthouse steps, 1 minute, face in the sun, hands in his pockets. Then he got in his car. A name to call. Not a lawyer, not his uncle. Raymond was gone. Just a daycare on the north side of the city where a little girl named Lily Ann Carver Holt was eating a snack and holding something in her hand. He wanted to hear her voice. He dialed. This was always going to be the ending. Not because it was fair to everyone in that courtroom, not because the road to it had been clean or kind or without cost, because it was true. And truth, applied with patience and precision and the discipline of a man who does not perform his pain publicly, has a way of finding its level. Always. Diane drove home from the courthouse alone. 3 blocks away she had parked that morning, a practical decision made at 8:15 a.m. when the courthouse lot was already full, already occupied with other people's consequential days. 11 minutes the walk back took. Without meaning to, she counted them. The way you count things when your mind needs something small and manageable to hold on to, while the larger things settle. No crying on the walk. No crying in the car, either. 4 minutes in the driver's seat with the engine off, hands in her lap, the June sun coming through the windshield, at the angle that makes everything look overexposed and slightly unreal. Then the engine started. Home. Parked in her usual spot in the building garage, elevator to the 7th floor, the door to Unit 7F unlocked. The apartment was exactly as she had left it. That was the strange part. Not the ruling, not the drive, not the 11-minute walk, but this. The coffee mug she hadn't finished that morning still on the counter. Lily's shoes by the door. Small, Velcro-fastened, one slightly more scuffed than the other from a week of determined walking. Yellow curtains in the bedroom catching the midday light the way they always caught it. Everything exactly the same. On the couch she sat. The same couch, brought from her previous apartment, the one she had sat on when Roy's envelope arrived 4 months ago, the one that had absorbed every significant moment of the last 2 years, and she stayed there for a long time without doing anything in particular. 30 years old. 3 years had passed since the Tuesday evening she had sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table and told him the baby wasn't his. 3 years since she had walked down his hallway, into his elevator, through his lobby, and into a night that had felt, at the time, like the beginning of something she had chosen correctly. That walk she thought about now. Not with the hindsight of someone who had always known better. She hadn't. Genuinely she had believed what she told Marcus. Genuinely she had calculated the timeline and arrived at the conclusion that served her and presented it as fact. Not because she was cruel, but because she was human, and humans are extraordinarily capable of believing what they need to believe. That did not make it without cost. Quiet and specific, the accounting sat with her on the couch in the unchanged apartment, and she did not look away from it. Marcus, 32 years old, steady, patient, genuinely loving in the way that asks nothing back, except presence. 6 o'clock calls on weekdays, not because it was romantic, but because he wanted to know how her day had landed. Sitting with her anxiety without trying to fix it. 7 names on a notepad kept intact for over 2 years because something in him, precise, patient, certain, had refused to let it go. She had told him the child wasn't his. He had believed her, still the part that cost the most. Not what she had done, but what he had given her in the doing. The grace of a man who trusts completely, who takes your word the way he takes air, who does not audit the people he loves. That grace she had spent. David came next in the accounting. Not with the same weight, because David had never carried the same weight. Electric where Marcus was still. Urgent where Marcus was patient. Loud where Marcus was quiet. Superiority was what she had read into those differences when they were simply differences. Electricity over steadiness, and she had discovered, in the particular darkness of a Tuesday at 11 p.m. with a child asleep down the hall, that electricity without foundation is just noise. Family came first, he had said. 3 times. 3 different rooms, 3 different versions of Diane who believed him each time because she needed to. Saturday he left with 2 boxes and a jacket he forgot, and the lease on an apartment he had quietly maintained throughout, which told her everything about his commitment that his words never had. She thought about the version of herself she had not become. Not dramatically. Not the fantasy version. Not the perfect alternate life. The quieter version. The one who might have looked at Marcus's stillness and understood it for what it was, instead of what it wasn't. The one who might have sat with her own restlessness long enough to recognize it as fear rather than wisdom. The one who might have chosen not what felt electric, but what felt true. Unavailable now, that version was. What remained was this: a couch, an unchanged apartment, a daughter who would grow up with a hyphen in her name, and a father who had circled her name on a notepad before he had ever heard her voice. A legal ruling that was fair and irrefutable and had cost $18,000 and 3 years and everything she thought she knew about herself. And one more thing. Her phone she picked up. Not to call anyone. No one existed in that moment she wanted to call. Her photos she opened, scrolled back further than usual. Past Lily's firsts, past the apartment before Lily, past the first months with David, back into the territory of 2 years ago, where photographs had a different quality. Quieter, less performed, taken without the awareness of an audience. Found without looking for it specifically. A photograph of Marcus at his kitchen table. Looking at something off camera, unaware she was taking the picture, a coffee cup in his hand, and the notepad visible beside the phone where it always was. 32 years old, looking exactly like himself. Never deleted. Stored in a folder labeled, at some point she could no longer precisely remember, with a single word. Old. A long time she looked at it. The cost of a lie isn't paid once. It compounds. Quietly, specifically, in the exact currency of what you had and chose not to keep. No announcement of itself as punishment. Just arrival, again and again, in the shape of what is no longer there. She closed the folder. She did not delete the photograph. Face down, her phone placed beside her on the couch. The apartment exactly as she had left it. The coffee mug, Lily's scuffed shoes, the yellow curtains catching the light, and the afternoon moved through the room without her. 2 years passed. Not dramatically, the way years actually pass, which is quietly and fast and surprising when you look back at the distance. Lily Ann Carver Holt was 3.5 years old. Opinions about breakfast she had. Strong ones, delivered with the absolute moral certainty of a person who has been alive long enough to know what she likes, and not long enough to understand that preferences are negotiable. Eggs she liked, not scrambled, never scrambled. Marcus had learned this on his 3rd Saturday. Careful. That first Saturday had been, both of them careful, Marcus and Lily, in the particular way of 2 people who are new to each other and aware of it. Picked up from Diane's building at 10 a.m., exchange paperwork signed, carried down to his car in the specific way Diane had shown him. Left arm supporting, right hand free. With the focused evaluation of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't assessing you, Lily looked at him. 20 minutes she said nothing. Then, somewhere on the drive to his apartment, she pointed at a bus and said, "Big," with the emphasis of someone making an important observation. Marcus agreed that yes, it was very big, and something between them shifted. Not dramatically, just perceptibly, the way temperature shifts when a cloud moves. By the 2nd Saturday she had learned his name. Not Dad. That came later, in its own time, without being asked for or prompted or made into a moment. Marcus first, with the careful pronunciation of a child sounding out something new, and he had answered to it every time without correction, because it was his name, and she was learning it, and that was exactly right. The apartment had changed. Not dramatically. Marcus was not a dramatic man, specifically. A corner of the living room that had previously held a filing cabinet now held a low shelf with books sized for small hands. A drawer in the kitchen that had held takeout menus now held crayons, not red ones specifically, though red was present, but a full set in a tin that Lily had examined with the seriousness of a person receiving something significant. Every colour she took stock of individually. Yellow, she decided, was her favourite. Of course it was. Nothing Marcus said when she told him, just nodded, found a piece of paper, and sat beside her on the kitchen floor while she demonstrated what yellow could do. 35 years old, cross-legged on a kitchen floor, watching a 3-year-old fill a page with yellow, and without performance, without announcement, without anyone watching to confirm it, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months after the ruling, the Holt estate transferred fully. Gerald Castellan managed the process with his customary precision. 3 properties: the associated trust, the rental income, the appreciated land outside the city, all formally restructured with Lily Ann Carver Holt named as the direct bloodline beneficiary. A separate educational trust established, $340,000 set aside specifically for her schooling, accessible in structured increments from age 18. Her name was on the documents now. The Holt folder. The one that had sat on Marcus's desk for years, patient and unremarkable, carried through every part of this story, had been replaced by a newer one, same family name on the tab, different name beside it. Lily Ann Carver Holt. Her name in the same clean print that had always carried the Holt name forward, on a document her great-grandfather had written into existence in 1971 without knowing the child who would eventually fulfill it. A man who had believed in bloodline and legacy and the particular responsibility of passing something forward. Not wealth exactly, though that was part of it, but the knowledge that someone after you would carry what you built and build further. She would. Marcus knew this the way he knew things. Quietly, certainly, without needing to say it aloud. On a Saturday morning in October, 2 years and 4 months after the ruling, 3.5 years into Lily's life, 5 years after Diane had sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table and told him something that was not true. Lily was at the kitchen table in his apartment, drawing. Yellow, mostly. Some red at the edges, a shape that was either a house or a person. The distinction, at this stage of her artistic development, was philosophical rather than practical. Narrating the drawing to herself in a low, continuous murmur, the way children do when they are deep in something that matters to them, when the world outside the paper has temporarily ceased to be relevant. Making coffee? Marcus was. Not watching her in the way of someone cataloguing a moment. Just there, present in the ordinary way, doing the ordinary thing. In the apartment that had changed specifically and permanently to include her. The notepad still beside the phone. The page with 7 names still intact. Never torn out, and now never would be, because the name he had circled was sitting at his kitchen table, filling a page with yellow. She looked up. "Marcus," she said. He turned. She held up the drawing. The house or person, the yellow and red, the thing made with full concentration and now presented for consideration. "This is you," she said. A moment he looked at it. Yellow, mostly. Something at the top that might have been hair. Standing in something that might have been a house, or might have been outside, or might have been both. The boundary between inside and outside, not yet a distinction she felt the need to make. He took the drawing. Held it the way you hold something you already know you will keep. "Thank you," he said. Back to the paper she went. Back to the coffee he went. Outside, October moved through the city the way October does. Cool and deliberate and indifferent to everything except itself. The Holt folder sat on the shelf where it always sat now, Lily's name on the tab, patient in a different way than it used to be. Not waiting anymore. Settled. There is something I never mentioned at the start of this video. Marcus already knew Lily's favourite colour. How? That is a story for another day. If any part of this stayed with you, subscribe. You will want to be here for what comes next.